The Roaring Twenties was a raucous time of bootleggers and flapper girls, but there was also a rapidly growing class of multimillionaires living lavish, luxurious lives, and they made sure everyone knew it. Here's how it really felt to be on top of the world 100 years ago. So why do we call it the Roaring Twenties anyway? The economy was expanding, industries were hiring, and consumers were buying more than ever. So the answer is that it's colloquial slang, almost an idiom. But anyway, all of this meant that the rich were getting richer. Some money, old money, was still inherited, but new money was being made hand over fist by bankers and financiers investing in American progress. But prosperity was concentrated at the very top. Some things never change, eh? Not everyone was feeling the economic boom, especially not the workers who made it possible. A large percentage of households lived at or below the poverty level. The gap between the filthy rich and the poor was vast. By 1928, the top 1% of US families was earning nearly a quarter of all pre-tax income, while the bottom 90% earned only a little over half. To offer a little more perspective, over 40% of Americans were living on less than $1,500 a year, which would be a little over $27,000 in today's money. So, yes, more Americans owned cars and radios by the end of the 1920s, but the true hallmark of the time was the disproportionate share of national income flowing to the very top, not a general improvement in living standards for lower income groups. In the 1920s, many high-income families lived in large urban townhouses or newly built mansions in affluent corridors and resort districts, or both, because what's the point of being super rich if you can't get out of town to escape the summer heat? Long Island's North Shore, aka the Gold Coast, was a hot spot for the country houses of financiers and industrialists. Oheka Castle, the estate of German-American investment banker Otto Hermann Kahn, contained 127 rooms, and that was the guy's summer house. Meanwhile, on New York's Park Avenue, railroad and mining magnate Arthur Curtis James and his wife lived in a mansion that, in 1914, reportedly cost about $1 million to build. Today, that would be about $31.5 million. James also maintained a Newport, Rhode Island estate called Beacon Hill, which features the Blue Gardens, a 10-acre garden that's a present-day tourist attraction. Those were the East Coast rich. The oil-producing states down south had their own elite neighborhoods built by oil millionaires so they could hang out with other oil millionaires. One example is Westover Hills in Fort Worth, Texas, which was built up during the 1920s by filthy rich oil executives, and they're still there. To this day, it's one of the state's wealthiest suburbs. Now, just like today, the 1920s wealthy made a habit of enjoying fine dining at expensive establishments. In New York, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel was one of the places to see, be seen, and eat fine food. The hotel was staffed with top-of-the-line chefs and servers who offered the well-heeled clientele the five-star treatment. Also, just like today, when the filthy rich traveled, it bore no resemblance to the treks and journeys made by regular people. The elite traveled in style, and they dined in style when they did it. On the White Star Line's RMS Olympic, sister ship to the ill-fated Titanic by the way, the restaurant was an haute cuisine joint that catered exclusively to first-class passengers. So they ain't eating oats.
But the liners inclined towards the fashion, and champagne and spirits were more popular than wine.
The Olympics menus, written in French because, of course, featured dishes like Suprême de Turbo, riz de veau aux truffes, or sweetbreads with truffles, and Waldorf salad, created by the Waldorf Astoria, by the way.
Could you make me a Waldorf salad?
A what?
Waldorf salad.
Well, I think we're just out of Waldorf.
For dessert, there was pêche melba, which is a way of saying peach melba that sounds super fancy. Go ahead, try it. Fancy, right? You may be wondering how people stayed healthy eating all that rich food. Actually, diet culture blew up during this time, and folks became aware of food choices, reducing regimens and calorie counting. It hasn't slowed down since. Finally, it's probably no surprise that the filthy rich of the 1920s could get things others couldn't, like liquor. Prohibition kicked in 1920, but the 20s roared anyway thanks to private clubs, bootleggers, and speakeasies. The rich got better quality booze, but everybody drank. New York City alone was estimated to have anywhere between 20,000 and 100,000 clandestine bars. Interestingly, the Prohibition era shifted upper-crust alcohol consumption away from beer, which was perceived as low class due to its pre-Prohibition associations with working-class saloons and German-American brewers, and toward distilled spirits and mixed drinks. Technology was on the move in the Roaring Twenties, and the American public fell in love with brand new forms of art and entertainment. The average American could listen to the radio and dance to Charleston or the shimmy in their living room or venture out to the pictures for a silent film. In fact, the first ever 3D movie, a silent one, was released in the 20s, or at least that's what they say. We have to go with secondhand reports because it's considered lost for good along with thousands of early films. But normal people could do all those things. Filthy rich entertainment was on a whole other level, a very exclusive private restricted membership level. The social calendars of 1920s elites included large private dances, charity balls, and country club sports. Georgia's Jekyll Island Club, a so-called millionaires club, limited its membership to 100, and the membership represented about 1/6 of the world's wealth at the time. That's what they said anyway. The filthy rich enjoy excess and can be prone to exaggeration. Anyway, member activities included hunting, golf, tennis, and of course, fine dining. That's also where a bunch of elites came up with the idea for the Federal Reserve, but we'll save that for a future conspiracy video. The 20s was the age of the flapper, trend-setting young women whose clothing reflected their carefree attitudes. Of course, wealthy status-obsessed elites were heavily into couture dressing and bespoke tailoring, and thank goodness, because nobody else was going to keep high fashion in business. But up and down the income spectrum, the trend in women's wear was a simple, boyishly straight silhouette with a dropped waist. More conservative ladies might go for the robe de style, a more feminine traditional look with a full skirt. Evening dresses were typically made of silk embellished with elaborate beadwork and sequins. Affluent women wore fine silks and high-grade wools. They dressed for the season because they could afford it. And there were rules. Wear white after Labor Day and your social status would take a nosedive. During the day, dresses tended to be more sporty, reflecting the influence of designers like Coco Chanel and Jean Patou. The cloche hat, bobbed hairstyles, and rising hemlines typified the 20s look, and the little black dress came into vogue and stayed. The men were into English tailoring and, of course, high-quality textiles, British wools, tweeds, and flannels. In the daytime, suits were more casual and were worn with soft collars and style innovations like Oxford bags, loose-fitting pants, and +4s for sports, trousers with an extra 4 inches of fabric. Expensive outerwear became a clear marker of wealth for young men, particularly at universities. And fur coats featured prominently in high society and on elite campuses for men and women. Princeton newspapers said raccoon coats were all the rage, and Ivy League students were known to spend hundreds of dollars to keep up appearances. Whatever happened upstairs in the fancy mansions of the filthy rich would have been impossible without armies of help buzzing around downstairs.
We require a butler with sommelier experience and a housekeeper, of course, to oil the wheels behind the scenes. Then a parlourmaid and a chauffeur come manservant.
Households in the 1920s employed both live-in and live-out staff, and the roles were explicitly defined. Maids, cooks, butlers, housekeepers, gardeners, chauffeurs, nursemaids, and more.
With a professed cook, you'll be wanting a kitchen maid as well, and a pantry boy who can double as a footman.
During this decade, there was a marked shift toward day work with defined shifts and hourly wages. There was a shortage of workers after the First World War, and job seekers took advantage of the opportunity. Some were able to negotiate an 8-hour day and wages comparable to factory work, while live-in staff typically faced longer, less defined hours. It was long before the Civil Rights Movement, and domestic work was stratified by race and gender. At the beginning of the decade, 4 out of every 10 domestic workers in American households were African American, mostly working as laundresses or servants. Of course, pay and protections left much to be desired. There was no minimum wage, with some domestic workers earning only room and board for their work. Being filthy rich in the 1920s meant you had tons of expendable cash, and that was nothing without social status. The uber-wealthy publicly paraded their bank accounts and positions through a variety of highly organized social rituals. Among the most iconic of these were debutante balls, at which the year's crop of eligible, rich young women were presented to society. Newspapers and magazines made much of these events, which inspired some pushback from the less well-heeled. A December 1929 piece in The New Yorker read, "Every day we see a picture of a debutante in the society pages, and although we used to imagine that the portrait changed from day to day, we now realize that it doesn't. It is the same girl." Another society-sanctioned way to cement one's status was patronage of the arts, or the poor. Philanthropists created and funded foundations and grants, named after themselves, of course, because that was part of the point. You can still see the Rockefeller name plastered everywhere. In 1928, the Rockefeller Foundation funded the Hale telescope from Mount Palomar to the tune of $6 million, over $109 million in today's money. Satire and social commentary were alive and well in the 1920s, and the filthy rich were an easy target. Early in the decade, journalist Edwin Lefebvre published The Annoyances of Being Rich Today in the Saturday Evening Post. For the piece, Lefebvre used the ruling class's actual complaints about the hard work of being filthy rich against them, and you can't make this stuff up. One rich guy whined, "I told a waiter, 'More bread, please.' And what do you think he did? He said, 'Sure thing.' Isn't that the limit?" That's totally the limit. The Great Gatsby writer F. Scott Fitzgerald had a love-hate relationship with the super rich and their appetites, notably describing the decade as the most expensive orgy in history. In his 1926 short story, The Rich Boy, Fitzgerald summed it up, writing, "The very rich think deep in their hearts that they are better than we are because we had to discover the compensations and refugees of life for ourselves. Even when they enter deep into our world or sink below us, they still think that they are better than we are." Eventually, the Roaring Twenties and the outrageously lavish lifestyles of the filthy rich came to a halt with Black Thursday, the catastrophic 1929 stock market crash. It kicked off an economic collapse that affected even the highest income households.
The wheels really started to come off.
Over the next 4 years, the US real GDP fell by about 29%. Thousands of banks found themselves in trouble, and unemployment rose sharply. By March 1933, approximately 12.8 million Americans, about 25% of the civilian labor force, found themselves jobless. Even multimillionaires felt the sting of the Great Depression. Self-made steel magnate Charles Michael Schwab died in 1939 with his liabilities exceeding his assets. According to Time magazine, Schwab had left no more to his heirs than if he had kept working at the $1 a day job in which he entered the steel business in 1881.